As the industry association, we work hard to keep members informed of developments to help them continue to protect employees, vendors, and clients. At the beginning, like most anyone else, our members, staff, and I were shocked at the announcements of lockdown actions, not just in Minnesota or the US, but worldwide. It quickly became clear that our industry was not wholly included in those deemed essential, and thus began an additional full-time job for me and many others to assess the critical circumstances surrounding lockdown actions and to assemble and execute a means to maneuver during a really tense time. Long story short, as many of you know, our industry's approach to working with our government was centered around the MNLA and rooted in calm, respectful, deliberate, and reasoned conversation. We knew that our elected and career government officials were facing severe stress too, both personally and professionally. To help manage the stress among our industry, not just MNLA members, and to focus industry actions as constructively as possible, we adjusted to reopen if deemed essential. We took many steps to transparent communication about our activities and actions and disseminate factual information at a time of near hysterics among some. This included frequent emails, postings on the website, new and repurposed social media outlets, and lots of one-on-one calls and emails. Our growers and garden centers lost the 2020 Easter selling season. But thinking of their fellow citizens, spontaneous outpourings of support to frontline workers took place across Minnesota from our growers and garden centers in the form of donated Easter lilies and other gifts. Ultimately, and thanks to you, the folks that are on the call today, both legislative officials as well as members, and to Commissioner of Ag Peterson and his staff, and to Governor Walz, our industry was determined to be able to operate safely and deemed essential just in time for the spring thaw. Since being declared essential and opening, our industry experienced a very busy 2020. Several segments reported significant sales growth and corresponding increases in employment across the state. Fast forward to 2021, and our member companies are better prepared than ever to operate safely and to embrace technologies that may or may not have been available or known to us, but are now. Our annual state convention was held virtually last month. Yes, it was different than we're used to, but during that event, it became clear that having to make things work online is helping us innovate, not just to try to keep our industry together, but to actually increase member activities and improve communications going forward. We found that several previously available but not necessarily widely embraced innovations are finding renewed purpose. For example, to help reduce the need to enter homes or businesses, remote control operated technologies are seeing higher demand, such as smart irrigation equipment that save water resources while also acting as a handy tool to serve clients and reduce face-to-face contact. Although we're not out of the woods with the pandemic, I remain optimistic for a busy and prosperous 2021 for our industry. I'm confident that the green industry will do its part to help our ailing economy by giving consumers a healthy outlet of constructive personal and family activities and to grow employment throughout the state. So thanks for listening. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, time's up. Hearing none, let's get to business. I'd like to introduce Joby Nolan of Precision Landscape to introduce our first topic, possibly familiar to many of you in attendance, the limitation of liability for snow and ice professionals who've been trained and accredited in the best management practices for snow and ice management to reduce salt and chloride pollution. Thanks for presenting, Joby.
Thank you, Tim. My name is Joby Nolan. I'm a resident of Hastings, Minnesota, and one of the owners of Precision Landscaping. MNLA has worked extensively in the past on this important issue, which blends both business concerns and environmental protection. Snow and ice removal is essential to maintaining the safety of properties in Minnesota, and by using proven techniques to ensure the safety of people while limiting salt use is imperative to both the people and the environment. MNLA has worked in the past with Senator Kerry Rude and Representative Peter Fisher to carry this important legislation, and it remains one of our top priorities for 2021. The bill establishes the Pollution Control Agency, a training program for snow and ice removal specialists to become trained as water friendly through training in best management practices for snow and ice. Additionally, the proposed policy limits the liability of these trained snow and ice professionals if they implement these best practices, keep records of their work that they complete, and are up to date in training for the pollution controls program. To incentivize use of the best management practices, and to benefit both the property owners, the environment, and the safety of entrance, the limited liability provision is really needed. Currently, property owners instruct contractors to oversalt their properties out of fear of lawsuits. Using more salt to melt snow and ice is not actually more effective. It only serves to increase the cost of doing business and increase the runoff of chlorides into Minnesota's lakes and rivers. By limiting the liability for commercial contractors and their clients, certified commercial applicators can implement their best practices. And of course, the bill only limits liability for those that are trained and those that keep records of the work being done and correctly and thoroughly clear the snow. It doesn't shield bad actors who are negligent in implementing these practices. We have trained our entire company in the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency Smart Salting class and have significantly reduced our chloride use by implementing many of their recommended practices. In our first year of training, we added liquid de-icers and calibrated all of our equipment and were able to reduce our salt use by 30%. And that season was one of the harshest winters we've had in the last few years, and we reduced the number of slip and fall claims we received that season as well. But without some sort of liability protection, the snow and ice removal industry may struggle to find insurance providers as well. We've had numerous insurance companies choose not to renew or refuse to provide a quote to us because of the slip and fall liability suits that are related to this industry. So because of that, we've implemented a lot more chloride use over the last few years prior to our reductions. And we'd like to see that change with some sort of liability protection. So please don't hesitate to contact me with any questions. And next, I'd like to introduce Polita LaPlante of Prescription Landscape in St. Paul to discuss duty to defend reform.
Hey, Joby.
Yep.
I have one question for you before we get to duty to defend. So congratulations on kind of licensing and getting people trained in reducing salt use. When working with clients, I know, of course, the crux of the bill is the liability protection. What has been like, handy or useful to getting your clients interested in you using these best management practices? Is it something that you have to actively sell to them, or is it a just kind of like, just go out and do the job? Let's just, don't care how you do it.
It hasn't taken a lot of commitment from the customers. It actually helps, we phrase it from, it helps protect their buildings and their landscapes and vegetation as well, because the chlorides are damaging to all their grass along sidewalks and to their buildings as well. There's a study that's shown that for every ton of road salt you put down, you should be putting in your pocket $800 for future repairs. So although that salt only costs like $100 a ton, the repairs down the road are going to cost you a lot more. So we try to use selling points like that as well.
Excellent, wonderful. One other thing is the bill author, actually, Representative Peter Fisher, is on the call. Representative Fisher, do you have anything you'd like to add about the bill in the House, or any other details about the legislation before we move on to duty to defend with Polita LaPlante?
Thank you, Forrest. Basically, just want to encourage people to reach out to their local representatives and encourage them to be supporting the bill as it goes through the process. We want to make sure that we get a committee hearing on it. We were real close in the last legislative session to getting it done, but because of COVID, it did not happen. We'd like to be able to make sure that we're making sure it's keeping on the front of everybody's mind so that we can get it done this year.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can I ask a question to Senator Newton here? Hi, Peter. And this probably goes to Joby. Who are your clients? Are they individual homeowners associations, cities?
It's kind of all of the above. We service commercial clients like strip malls, retail buildings, but we also service government sites which deal with the same slip and fall lawsuits that the private sector does, and HOAs as well. It's kind of across the board we're seeing this.
Okay. And Peter, your legislation addresses all of those different clients?
Yes, Senator Newton. It's written in such a way so that anybody who takes the certification and gets certified is able to use that. I know that there was one provision, I think, in the past, and Forrest might remember better than I did, that left some question whether if a property owner was doing it, if they would be protected or not. And I think we've got that addressed. I'm going to toss that back to Forrest to see if he can remember where we ended up on that.
The way that the legislation was written, previously did have that. So basically, it was client, it was the contractor and also the property owner. But we're still waiting, I think, just kind of for the bill to drop due to some backlog that we're all experiencing with different pieces of legislation. So once we see the language as it appears on the bill introduction, I can follow up with you on that, Senator.
Yes, thank you, Forrest. And that's why it's a little tough, is we've all been waiting to see what the final languages are when the bills come out. There's a backup there. What we did is we asked that we'd have it start off as to where we left it last year. So they would, I was wrong, as they would still be covered. But we want to make sure that we're seeing all the language by the time before we get everything into the hopper and out to committees.
Thank you all.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions before we move on? All right. Well, obviously, SALT is a very important issue. We've worked on it for quite a few years now. Definitely was the first thing that I was introduced to when I was hired here at MNLA, and it's something I'd love to get across the finish line, just because no one wants salty lakes. I mean, really. So let's come together. We can do it, and I think it's definitely something that's important to the members and to the environment. So I guess next, let's move on to Paulita LaPlante, who's going to talk about duty to defend and construction contracts, which has been something that has been going on. At least the debate on for quite a while, and I think that this final legislation with the subcontractors and other groups is definitely an important legislative proposal this session. Go ahead, Paulita.
Thank you, Forrest, and thank you, Joby. As stated, my name is Paulita LaPlante. I'm of Inver Grove Heights, and I'm the majority owner of Prescription Landscape. So we're a WBE company. We provide landscape services, snow and ice management, and landscape construction. Duty to defend reform is vitally important to equity in construction and contracts. Ending the duty to defend will prohibit the current contract provision that requires subcontractors to defend the general contractor regardless of fault. This common sense change will ensure negligent parties pay their own legal fees, including subcontractors, and preserve the right of general contractors to have subcontractors defend general contractors when the sub was negligent, the vicarious liability protected in Minnesota Statute 337.05 subdivision 1D. As currently allowed in Minnesota Statute 337A, GCs contractually require subs to pay legal fees for liability incurred by the general contractor, even when the general contractor is negligent and the subcontractor is not. If a subcontractor doesn't agree, the sub is removed from consideration for that contract. This inherently unfair practice threatens businesses of all sizes throughout Minnesota, and particularly burdens small and emerging businesses without access to in-house legal counsel. I thought it'd be particularly illustrative to read to you a clause from a recent RFP in contract that we received. And the larger GCs have actually expanded the breadth of contractual language to force all contractual risk downstream. So this is the excerpt from a contract we just received. To the fullest extent permitted by law, scares you right away. Subcontractors shall defend, and then in parentheses, using counsel reasonably acceptable to the general contractor. That's scary number 2. Shall defend, indemnify, pay, save, and hold harmless the GC from and against any liabilities, damages, costs, expenses, suits, losses, claims, actions, fines, and penalties, including without limitation court costs, reasonable attorney's fees, and any other reasonable costs of litigation of third parties that the GC may suffer, sustain, or incur to the extent arising or in connection with, number 1, subcontractor's presence on the property. Now it goes on to list, other real issues in terms of liability. But that clause that I just read to you is frightening. And that's the type of clause that a lot of insurance companies will not advise you to sign, because it goes well beyond liability for errors and omissions of your own. Are there any questions on this important policy priority?
I have a question. This is Greg Clausen, Apple Valley Senator. What's the rationale for this? I mean, obviously it's been in place for a while. What was the original rationale for this clause?
I believe that it was a mistake, and Forrest certainly, and Tim can jump in on this, but the definition of indemnification agreement doesn't include the word defend, and is a slippery slope from that point forward. So I think it was mostly going back. This is mostly a proposal to go back and make a correction, an amendment to the two statutes for private and public construction.
And Senator, if I may add, just, you know, obviously within the discussions around this policy change, you know, the opposing parties often bring up that, you know, it's hard to determine liability on the onset, or that they don't control the scope of the work for subcontractors, as they are, you know, independent. That, you know, they hire them to do work, but they don't, you know, it's not prescriptive. It's just those claims, especially for large general contractors, especially working with smaller businesses, emerging businesses that, you know, might not have in-house legal counsel, or the, you know, kind of the contractual wherewithal to kind of sort through various types of indemnity clauses. It can be very harmful when say you know, they're suing. They're bringing all the subcontractors in to defend them or pay their attorney's fees for work that had nothing to do. Like, even if someone was the one that dug the hole, if the electrical system or the alarm system is, you know, faulty, or if that, you know, if there was a tort claim related to work that had nothing to do with them, and they weren't even, you know, they were nowhere near the actual incident, they can still be required to pay those legal fees. And I think that that's an inherently unfair business practice. And that was the legal fees. The limiting damages was prohibited in 2013. You couldn't pay for the damages, but then they kind of turned around and decided that, you know, well, let's require them to pay legal fees. And so we think that also is not a very fair way to go about, you know, defending yourself in court.
And I think, yeah, I think the longer that this goes unrectified, you will see more more clauses like that, which I just read to you, with an incredibly broad clause that certainly overreaches.
Absolutely.
And just, if you don't mind briefly, Senator Clausen, this is, to be clear, responsible business owners will carry insurance and will be responsible for things that are within their scope of work. That's not what's, just to help make sure that we don't have a misunderstanding. We're not looking for a free pass here as an industry or as practitioners from what we're responsible for doing. Indeed, we own up to what we're doing. The issue seems to be that the folks that practice general contracting appear to want to be nothing other than a matchmaker, with no responsibility or accountability for the projects that they undertake on behalf of the people that wish to undertake a project. And we find this increasingly unfair and burdensome. And the clause that Paulita just read some exempt some pieces of is pretty onerous. It's really getting a lot worse. That's one of the worst clauses I've heard in quite a while.
Yeah.
And the problem is, if Paulita doesn't sign it, somebody will. Now, shame on them, perhaps, but it's a predatory practice, and there is good uses for government. We all agree. To us, this is a good use for government to help out and to redirect a little bit when writing contracts, to make sure that fairness prevails, and that the people that are assuming the responsibility for overseeing the conduct of a project also assume the responsibility or liability that they have, rightly so, or rightly. Thank you.
Very good. I'd like to next introduce Russ Junt of Conserva Irrigation to discuss backflow return. Russ?
Very good. Thank you, Polita. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. My name is Russ Junt. I'm the founder of Conserva Irrigation. We are founded right in Ham Lake, Minnesota, so just up off of Highway 65. In the last 3 seasons, we've since expanded to 23 additional states and with over 50 locations. The purpose really for this part of the segment is on backflow prevention. So to both repair and test devices in the state of Minnesota, one must be licensed as a plumber, despite no such distinction made by the National Training Authority. And so these devices are ubiquitous throughout the state and help protect the water supply and public health. However, by limiting the repair authorization to licensed plumbers only, we risk that some devices might go unfixed despite being tested and therefore threaten the public health and well-being. So with the annual testing requirement for these devices and the critical role they serve in protecting water resources and public health, the MNLA seeks to amend the law to align with the ASSE training certification requirements. So the backflow prevention and cross connections and the associated assemblies that are used to protect potable water supplies is considered by the ASSE and other institutions to be unique and subject to specific, comprehensive training, regardless of and independent of status as a licensed plumber. The ASSE coursework, testing, and practical exams are the same for plumbers and non-plumbers. The ASSE approach supports the requirement that any person who chooses to interact in any way with backflow prevention equipment must first become qualified to do so via standalone comprehensive coursework and exams in the form of ASSE 5110 backflow prevention assembly tester certificate, and if interested in the work of repair or rebuilding of backflow assemblies, pass the ASSE approved 5130 training. So the MNLA supports strongly changing Minnesota law to allow those who have proper training, that's the key thing, proper training, right, as required by the Commissioner of Labor and Industry to both test and repair these devices rather than just repair. So the repair is simple and can be done in just a few minutes with proper training. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. So with thousands of these ubiquitous devices around the state, in fact, tens of thousands of them, it's all hands on deck in the spring to make sure that cross control and backflow devices are operating properly. We encourage you to support House File 137 and Senate File 183. So I'm going to, with that, show you how extremely simple it is. So we have an anti-siphon device. We have a pressure vacuum breaker here, okay? And in order to repair this device, it's as simple as removing a dust cap, okay? Unscrewing an internal bonnet, removing a plunger and a washer, taking the new version of those, right? Placing them back inside, putting it back together, and that's it. And through this, we're able to preserve the public health and well-being for these types of devices. And it really is that simple. So in the springtime, my office out of Ham Lake, for example, it's approximately 2,000 to 2,500 properties in a 4-week period of time that we need to get on in a condensed period of time. And I'm just one of many, many contractors out there representing this industry. And in 4 weeks, we have to go out to that household, test the device. When it's found to be defective or needing to have some sort of repair, at that point, we need to tag it and walk away. And the homeowner now is reliant upon a plumber to show up. They have to contact a plumber. The plumber needs to show up, if at all, 4, 5, 6, 10 weeks from then, and do that repair. And then the device needs to be tested again for efficacy. So it's cumbersome. It doesn't make sense. And if given the same training in the same room as plumbers. That's what we're asking for, is the ability to make that repair simply and not have the homeowner ask our technicians, well, if I don't get this plumber, how do I get I want my system running right now. It's springtime, it's time to go. And the homeowner simply watches us turn this device off and tag it as don't use. And the homeowner can simply come back around the corner and turn it back on and ignore the problem. And that is not the intention, I don't think, of anybody on this call. So that's how it works. Any particular questions with regards to this type of reform?
Russ, you're obviously going to be opposed by the plumbers union on this. How much opposition is there? Is it minimal, or are they going to come out strongly against it?
We've had considerable opposition, and I would think it's all in theory, right? I don't think that if you talk to the actual group of plumbers out there, that this is their focus, their line of work, that they would really prefer to come out for such a simple activity and disrupt their normal course of business. But they are opposed to it, of course, and they're trying to protect their book of business.
If I may add to this, and then Tim, we are obviously, in ongoing discussions with the pipe fitters, with the plumbers and mechanical contractors, to try and find, areas of agreement and help them understand, the very essential nature of having these devices properly fixed and properly assessed, and also make the point that what we're not trying to do is have our folks be allowed to install these devices, which is very clearly plumbing work, and is not something that we are in any interest in changing the law so that they can install, which is a whole nother separate part of training. This is just so the training that they all receive is the same for repair and test, and that's what the bill allows for. And of course, there will be, continued discussions and continued disagreements, but we're very very thankful for Representative Fisher again to carry this piece of legislation in the House, and Senator Jason Rarick, who provides a unique labor and Republican perspective on that in the Senate. And so we're happy to work with him on that piece of legislation. And Tim,
thank you. So Senator Newton, Russ makes a good point. A couple of things. One is that there are those that work to protect the interests, so to speak, of different industries, and then those who work in the industry. And the folks who conduct plumbing work, by and large, don't necessarily want to do this work. And indeed, as Russ pointed out in his presentation, they can't, even if they're licensed plumbers, unless they carry the same accreditations that we carry. They just simply have the ability granted to them in a Minnesota amendment by the Minnesota Plumbing Board to be able to repair or to take the course and repair where we're prevented from taking the course to repair. The national standard that the Minnesota Plumbing Board accepted a few years ago doesn't determine who gets to do the work. It determines who's qualified to do the work and what the qualification is and how it shall be promulgated. So I hope that's a little helpful clarification. And as Forrest put it, there are installation practices that are indeed plumbing. We don't want to do that work unless somebody's a licensed plumber. This is about protecting the public health and safety. There are just simply not enough accredited individuals to do the work. And we consider ourselves cousins to plumbers, not enemies of plumbers. But we could use a little bit of help getting that point across. And this seems to be a great first step toward doing so if we can get support from the legislature and from the governor to sign the legislation that's being put forward.
Well stated, Tim. Very well stated. All right, so any additional questions on top of that?
All right, well, thank you, Russ, and thank you for the demonstration. It's always good to when we were talking about this last year, it was fun to run around the Capitol with the backflow devices and repair them in legislator offices. So I'm glad that we could recreate that moment for here today. So a couple of other things that I would like to just mention before we have questions and we sign off for the evening that we're looking at this session. EAB funding. So this is the Emerald Ash Borer pest, which, as many of us know, is an invasive species and it's spreading across the state. The Department of Agriculture has a regulatory authority over it in kind of some wooded areas in the DNR, also in the state forests. And we're always looking to try and secure more funding to help cities and communities throughout the state deal with how to either treat trees, remove trees, and then, of course, what we're talking about more now is disposing of waste. One of the big things that I believe quite a few of us are familiar with is the district energy disposal or facility that serves as a disposal site for a lot of the 16 kind of county area here in the metro. And so we're looking for as much funding as possible to cities that honestly are just overwhelmed with the amount of ash infestations that we're seeing. So last year in the bonding bill, there was a few $1 million for those proposals. It was very creative. It treated trees as infrastructure, which I think is a very forward-thinking way to do that. And there are proposals for several $1 million this session as well to grants to cities for them to do either treatment or shade tree replacement. So it's going to come to every district and to every city in the state. And it's something that definitely needs attention and resources. So I believe the bill is being carried by Chair Hansen and Senator Ingebrigtsen, and I would definitely encourage your support of that because the cities in your district will be facing a budget crunch when it comes to what to do with these trees and how to really treat and mitigate. After Dutch elm in the 70s, as I understand it, the decided to turn around and just plant ash trees everywhere rather than achieve a biodiverse shade tree canopy. And I think, now that we're moving through it, we're seeing the consequences of that. But, moving forward, we need money. So the COVID-19 paycheck protection tax matching, something from the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, and we're supportive of it, which is the Paycheck Protection Program, as many of us know, has been a lifeline to a lot of businesses in Minnesota, green industry included. With more than 100,000 businesses in Minnesota accessing the program, it's really vital to ensure that while some of these loans are forgivable by the federal government, they could be treated as income tax, or they could be taxed at the state level, and that will kind of harm a lot of businesses that have taken these programs to continue to have people stay on payroll and have their businesses stay open. So as that proposal by Chair Marquardt and I believe Senator Bach in the Senate to get those so it's not taxed at the state level, that's something that I think will be very impactful to a lot of businesses, green industry and otherwise. Transportation funding, incredibly important. We've been talking about it for a long time, and I know a lot of people have as well. We've supported robust transportation packages in the past. We have supported a gas tax in the past, and we continue to try and work with the stakeholders at the legislature and with stakeholders and other industry groups to continue to compel a strong commitment to transportation funding, because as roads deteriorate and as they become more crowded, that can delay project times and just really increase the cost of business. And the last thing that we're looking at is at sales tax. And one thing that we have been dealing with quite a bit is the way that sales tax audits take place and how they treat different types of improvements to real property and to whereas if it's putting a plant in a pot, then it's treated one way. If it's planted in the ground, it's treated the other way. In the way that these audits go about, they are very hard for compliance for a lot of members, and they're unclear, and it's definitely a tiresome and worrisome thing that it's a little ambiguous on how various types of plant material is treated. Tim, I'm going to kick this one over to you. Do you have anything you'd like to add about the sales tax issue before we move on to questions?
In good language, nice language,
542, whichever language you want.
calm, reasoned language. No, ultimately, what Forrest touches on is really a pain point for many of our members. So some of our members are considered improvement to real property and aren't subject to this, but many others of our members are. And as Forrest sort of touched on, pardon me.
Oh, looks like
That isn't even my phone. Anyway, as Forrest touched on, you could take a plant, and if it's planted in a pot, the activity of selling that plant and planting it into a pot is actually taxable. If you take the very same plant and you plant it into the ground, into a planting bed, it's considered an improvement to real property. And the challenge is enormous upon our members and subject to a great deal of interpretation among the revenue agents who are auditing our members to determine whether or not the activities that took place a year, 2 or 3 ago is taxable. And it's we've been through at my company's 2 sales tax audits. I'm trying to finish one up right now, the second one, and we're looking at events that took place 3 years ago and trying to determine what we did specifically with pieces of plant material or pieces of landscape material. And it's taking hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars of staff time, officer time, and accounting time to try to work through these issues. And we think that there should be a way to simplify this and perhaps consolidate this, even if it means finding some ways that all elements of some of our work is taxable, just so that we can be compliant as an industry and not feel like we have to look over our shoulders in fear of the outcome of an audit. As I mentioned, I've been through 2 of them. And at the end of the day, the actual penalties that we've paid have been very minor. And they've been nothing compared to the amounts of dollars that it's taken for us to work with the revenue agents in conducting their audits. It's cost thousands and thousands of dollars. And there's several members that have gone through the same thing that I have. And we'd like to find a way to fix it. And we understand that when we talk about or introduce a concept of any sort of concept of sales tax reform, the feeling among many of our elected officials, government officials is, oh my God, we're opening a Pandora's box. So we sympathize with that statement, but there's something really wrong with what's going on as regards our industry, and we would love to find a way to calmly work through this, even if it takes a couple of years, and working with the revenue department to find ways to calmly work through this. A few years back, I'll finish with a few years back, we did work with the revenue department to find a way to write down what is and isn't taxable. And we have several forms. If anybody's interested, we'll be glad to send them to you. But we're still left with a great deal of unknown and a lot of interpretation among the revenue agents upon our membership, even when we present them these documents that came out of a collaboration with the revenue department. I'll stop there and see if there's any questions on what I'm suggesting.
Thank you, Tim.
Any volunteers to help?
And I think now would be a great time if there are any questions about what we've talked about today. Now would be a great time to ask them. If you'd like to think about it a little bit, you can always contact me. I will send a follow-up email with all my contact information. Usually it would be easier just to find me at the Capitol. Obviously that's not as doable these days, but do we have any questions on the content we've presented today? All right, well, it seems like we were very comprehensive. I appreciate that. And I want to thank everyone being here today. Tim, Cassie, any of the presenters, do you have any last things you'd like to say before we end the meeting?
I have a question among our legislative officials. I don't know if there's a way to answer this with a head nod or otherwise. We're all living in extraordinary times. This is the first time the Nursery and Landscape Association has undergone this format for our Day on the Hill. We'd love to see you in person, and I'm sure you'd love to see us in person as well, especially one-on-one with your own constituents. How are you experiencing this meeting today? Is it positive? Is setting aside the fact that we're dealing with extraordinary actions? Is this a workable format and a good use of your time? Thank you.
I would say absolutely. It was great to hear the different bills lined up and presented by different people. You know, we all wish we could be together and be more interactive. Zoom's sort of awkward, but given the circumstances, this is great. I learned a lot. Thank you very much for hosting.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative Morrison.
And of course, please keep an eye out for in your inbox. We'll have our members send follow-ups with some supplemental materials on what we talked about today, as well as hopefully finding a time for you to sit down and kind of talk one-on-one, maybe on Zoom, maybe on the phone, about their businesses, about your district, and about really anything else. So with that, I think we can call it a night. Thank you everyone so much for coming today. I'm glad it was beneficial to hear about what we're working on, and we really appreciate your commitment and the hard work you do on behalf of Minnesota. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
To everyone.
Bye-bye.